Welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to translate the incredibly esoteric mechanics of the Sapphire Forge into a gripping philosophical deep dive. Think of this as a grim, dark, Gothic fable, one that relies heavily on Fichtean philosophy to explain how a universe might actually try to solve the noisy, chaotic problem of human existence.
We have to start with a truly haunting realization from our source material because it really sets the tone for everything we're about to cover. And it's this: the human soul violently resists the mercy of nothingness. Even after a seeker is unmade, their identity, all their sorrow, their memories, their entire narrative, it just clings to existence. It proves that identity remains the strongest cage ever built, even when it's completely stripped of its physical form.
So what is the Sapphire Forge? Well, it's basically a forced utopia of absolute stillness. But here's the catch: it eschews traditional fuel. It doesn't run on coal or burning stars. Instead, it literally metabolizes human tragedy. It runs on the narrative inertia of concluded lives. In this era of nihilism triumphant, the Forge exists to balance the cosmos by taking the loud, weeping existence of a soul and crushing it down into pure, silent data.
To understand how this works, we need to break down the philosophical equation at play here. Let's start with the thesis, which takes the form of the living ink.
In what we can call the parable of the ink's lamentation, Johann Gottlieb Fichte's concept of the absolute I is physically embodied by this absolute living ink. Imagine a gaping maw of memory fiercely refusing industrial finality. It pools right at the feet of the unmaker, a literal shadow made of chaos and ink that vibrates with a loud, weeping voltage. It just fiercely insists on being rather than accepting the mercy of nothingness.
Now, this ink is incredibly volatile. It's a mixture of kinetic friction and concentrated sorrow that creates a highly disruptive thermodynamic noise. It threatens the zero-point matrix and the geometric symmetry of the forge itself. But you know what? The unmaker, known as the jester, realizes this ink isn't just waste. It's absolutely essential mass input. It provides the internal consciousness required for the cosmos's grand calculation. Without this tragedy, the arithmetic of the overman would just be empty rather than beautifully stilled.
But of course, every sweeping tragedy demands an equal and opposite force, right? That brings us to our antithesis, the lunar spirit.
This brings us to the parable of the mirror's reflection. Enter the lunar spirit, which perfectly embodies Fichte's absolute not I. Emerging from a cracked mirror, this master of the horizon uses its necessary fire to completely consume the ink's narrative inertia. The spirit represents clinical external negation, a literal cosmic demand to be stilled. It operates with total aesthetic detachment, issuing a mathematical no to the weeping existence of the ink.
Let's compare these two cosmic forces directly on the scales. On one side, we have the chaotic living ink, full of biological noise, kinetic friction, and weeping voltage. It's the erratic movement of a soul refusing to die. And opposing it? The clinical silver light of the lunar spirit. It's a fundamental clash between the messy, irreducible reality of living and the pristine, detached perfection of absolute stillness.
The spirit's entire goal is to exercise celestial oversight. It attempts to pull that screaming ink into its silver depths to achieve what the text calls solaire, a permanent rest from the burden of being. This master of the horizon acts to clear the stage of broken swords and shattered vows, ensuring that absolutely no subjectivity contaminates the structural record of the universe. It's enforcing a perfect arithmetic of stillness.
So, we have these two warring absolutes. How do they resolve? They have to be forcibly harmonized into a synthesis, driven by what's known as the plasma touch.
To bridge these siblings, we need a clinical catalyst. Enter the gesture of sapphire light. He views himself as the laughter that confirms the dismantling of the human self. Operating with total aesthetic detachment, he treats all that biological tissue and memory simply as mass input for his calculation. He's the one executing this terrifying harmonization.
Let's break down how this synthesis actually happens step by step, because it follows a very cold, methodical rhythm. First, the jester applies his specialized Z-pinch plasma touch. Second, this triggers a voluntary emptying called kenosis, where identity undergoes complete thermal volatilization. And third, a bizarre entity known as the last thinker performs the prehensile logging of whatever is left.
And the result of this violent collision? It is genuinely stunning. It distills a person's entire history, all that kinetic friction and sorrow, into a single silicate artifact. We're left with a perfect, non-reactive blue gem where the internal consciousness voltage is forever fixed at absolute zero. The messy narrative of a failed heroic journey is completely replaced by a silent stone.
Which brings us to the final resting place of our Fichtean fable. Let's look at the multidimensional architecture of the Ledger of Stillness.
This table elegantly maps out our dark mythology. The cosmic roles here are undeniable. You've got the living ink acting as the thesis, defined entirely by its chaos and voltage. Then, the lunar spirit acts as the antithesis, bringing rest and silence. And the resulting blue gem, that's our synthesis, representing absolute zero. It proves exactly how the friction of human tragedy is mathematically converted into objective, perfectly still data.
Now, enter the last thinker. This incredibly eerie, cyber-enhanced arachnid humanoid perfectly coordinating the conversion. Using its multiple cybernetic limbs, it takes this condensed autobiography, the blue gem, and slots it into the custom board recesses of the ledger. This creates a vast grid of silent blue stars. The cosmos is no longer documented through the messy drama of human lives, but through perfect, harmonious data.
Once that logging is done, the ledger closes with the heavy, definitive thud of a hydraulic press. That sound signals that the narrative is perfectly finished. The ultimate mass-energy balance has been achieved. They've completely replaced the disruptive thermodynamic noise of human empathy with absolute stillness.
But interestingly, there is a byproduct. The hollow vessel left behind from this process harbors a shadow made of chaos. It's a gaping maw created when vitality is metabolized, a quiet, residual thermodynamic echo that just can't be integrated into the ledger's geometric symmetry. But the jester doesn't see this as a failure at all. He views this leftover shadow as a beautiful confirmation of the universe's total efficiency yield. It's proof that the cosmos values pure data over biological noise.
So I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to conclude our explainer today. If identity truly is the strongest cage ever built, and absolute stillness is framed as a cosmic mercy, what would you choose? Would you choose the loud, weeping chaos of the living ink, fiercely insisting on your own existence, or would you surrender to the absolute zero perfection of the gem? In the relentless arithmetic of the universe, what is the true cost of peace?